It was December 1970. In Santa Cruz, a city in Spain, a respected local doctor named Walter Trankler was at his home. His housemaid, Sabine, a young woman, was in the kitchen, busy with her daily chores. Suddenly, there was a knock at the front door. Dr. Trankler went to answer it. When he opened the door, he saw two men standing there. They told him their names were Harald Alexander and Frank. They explained that they were Sabine's father and brother, respectively. Dr. Trankler, being a kind man, called Sabine from the kitchen to the front door so she could see her family. He then gave them some privacy, letting them talk together near the entrance of the house. He didn't want to listen in on their conversation, as that would be impolite. However, something about the two men made Dr. Trankler uneasy. They were both completely covered in mud. It seemed strange to him that they would be dressed like that when coming to see their daughter and sister. It wasn't how people usually dressed for a family visit. Because of this odd appearance, Dr. Trankler felt a strange, uneasy feeling. He couldn't shake off the feeling that something was wrong. Driven by his gut feeling, he decided to secretly listen to what they were saying. He wanted to know what was going on. What he overheard during that secret listen chilled him to the bone. The father and brother, Harald and Frank, confessed to a horrific crime. They had just killed 3 members of their own family. They had murdered Dagmar, the 42-year-old mother, along with Sabine's 2 sisters, 15-year-old Petra and 17-year-old Marina. The doctor was horrified to learn such a terrible thing. Dr. Trankler stood still, completely shocked by what he'd just heard. He wondered if Sabine would faint or scream right away, but surprisingly, Sabine just took her dad's hand, gently pressed it to her cheek, seeming to approve of the terrible thing. She calmly said, "I'm sure you did what you thought you had to do." Then, the family hugged, a scary show of togetherness. The doctor knew he was with a very dangerous family, one that had lost all sense of right and wrong. He felt a rush of fear and a strong need to keep himself safe. He quickly went to his room, locking the door. He then quickly made the door stronger with anything he could find, making a sort of wall against the killer family. He instantly called the police, telling them the awful thing he had heard. Every minute that passed before the police came felt like forever to the doctor. He was very scared, not knowing if the Alexanders would run away or try to hurt him next. He listened carefully for any sound from outside his locked room. While the police came pretty fast, the painful wait felt like a very long time. When they finally got inside, the Alexander family was still there, talking normally as if nothing strange had happened. Then, Dr. Trankler saw something truly awful. The stuff he first thought was mud was dripping from Harald's hands. It wasn't mud, it was blood. When the police officers hurried into the doctor's house, the 3 family members didn't seem at all like they had just murdered their own relatives. The police wondered if they had gotten a false alarm. They asked Harald, "What's happening?" Without any sign of guilt or regret, Harald calmly explained again what he had told his daughter. He didn't hesitate at all. He even gave the police the address of his apartment, where the terrible crime had happened. The police were completely confused by how open and honest Harald was. They weren't sure if this was some kind of strange joke. A few officers were quickly sent to the apartment to check if Harald was telling the truth. What the police saw there was the most awful, shocking sight they had ever seen. 3 bodies, terribly mutilated, were lying in the apartment. 1 was in the bedroom and 2 were in the living room. There was blood everywhere. It was a scene of utter horror. And if that wasn't awful enough, the breasts, heart and vagina of the dead people had been cut off their bodies and nailed to the wall. What kind of insane rage could have made them do something so unbelievably monstrous? The Lorber Society was a small religious group that started in the early 1800s in Dresden, Germany. Harald Alexander had become the leader of this group after the previous leader, George Relay, died. The Lorber cult was quite small, with only about 100 members. Their core belief was simple. Everything outside of their group was completely evil and controlled by the devil. When Harald took over as leader, he added one more rule, one more thing they had to believe, that his second son, the newborn Frank, was the Messiah, sent by God. The followers of the group accepted this new rule without question. So Frank, as a young boy, lived like a god. He was worshipped like a god. Even his most ridiculous requests were obeyed immediately. He had complete control over the cult and his own family. The members of the cult would line up to hear the word of God from him. As Frank grew into a teenager and began to experience sexual feelings, he also learned that having sex with anyone outside of the cult, those they considered impure and servants of the devil, would be a terrible sin. So Frank came up with a shocking idea: incest. He suggested having sexual relationships with his own mother and sisters. Everyone in the cult agreed to this insane plan without a second thought. To them, this was like a message from a prophet, the will of God. This happened in the late 1960s. Word about the family and their strange practices started to get out. The Harald Alexander family realized they were being investigated. They packed up and moved to the Canary Islands in Spain. But even though they changed locations, they didn't change their beliefs. Frank, fueled by intense fanaticism, was completely out of control. On December 22, 1970, 10 months after they moved to Spain, Frank announced that the hour of killing had come. For Frank and his family, this hour of killing was how they believed women could get into heaven. They thought women were naturally evil, and that without this killing ritual, they wouldn't be allowed into heaven. It's unclear if this idea came from the Lorber cult, or if Frank just made it up himself. The women in the family were told to be ready for the hour of killing at any time, whenever Frank decided it was the right moment. When Frank decided the time was right, the women were expected to submit and let him attack them. One day, Frank was sitting on the edge of his mother's bed. He didn't like the way she looked at him. He felt she wasn't allowed to look at him like that. He suddenly knew it was time for the hour of killing. The Harald family was so devoted to their twisted beliefs that they wouldn't even question the idea of killing themselves. So when Frank hit his mother's head with a wooden clothes hanger, she actually adjusted her position to make it easier for him to kill her. Frank kept hitting his mother, who was lying face down, while Harald at the same time started playing his harmonium, a musical instrument like a piano. The two sisters, Petra and Marina, soon arrived. Seeing their mother being brutally killed didn't seem to affect them at all. Harald, while playing the ritualistic music, told them that the hour of killing had arrived. The girls knew what this meant. They stood there, calmly waiting for their turn. Frank, having finished killing his mother, came over and started hitting both of his sisters wildly. In just a few minutes, they were both lying lifeless on the floor, in a pool of blood. A neighbor later said they might have heard some quiet moans coming from Harald's apartment, but the loud music Harald was playing covered up any other sounds. After Frank finished killing his mother and sisters, he got a knife and some pruning shears to cut off the unclean body parts of the dead women. It's possible that at least one of the three women was still alive at this point. Frank wasn't a skilled killer who knew exactly where to strike. He was a wild, unpredictable killer who just beat his victims wherever he could. He probably didn't kill them instantly. So Frank finished killing them by hacking at their bodies with the kitchen knife. Then, he tried to cut off their breasts, nipples, and vaginas to nail them to the wall. This was difficult, so Frank and Harald took turns doing it. While one of them cut off the body parts, the other played the harmonium. The ritual ended after they took Dagmar's heart, wrapped it in a cord, and nailed it to the wall along with the other body parts. Harald and Frank celebrated after finishing the ritual. They ran around, singing, feeling proud that they had completed the ceremony and freed the women. The father and son then went to sleep in another place they owned, sleeping peacefully and feeling proud of what they had done. The day after the horrific ritual killings, Dr. Walter Trankler overheard the family's conversation and immediately called the police. Frank and Harald never went to trial. The authorities determined they were mentally unstable and sent them to a Fampi mental hospital. Sabine begged to go with them, but instead, she was sent to a convent. No one ever heard from her again. Frank and Harald Alexander stayed in the mental hospital for many years. Then, in 1991, 20 years after they were admitted, they escaped. To this day, no one knows where they are. The father and son, still trapped in their shared, dangerous delusions, disappeared completely. Where could they have gone? Did their 20 years in the hospital change their mental state at all? These questions may never be answered.